I felt that I was a failure personally because I had tied myself and my reputation to the business, so that when the business didn't work out, then I looked at me and said, well, then something's wrong with me.
Welcome to the Real F Word. Welcome back to the Real F Word podcast. And I'm so excited to have Bubba Page here. Bubba's a great friend of mine. In fact, we were just talking. I mean, we couldn't scroll back far enough. It was probably 2008. In fact, I knew Bubba before people called him Bubba.
That's true.
Right? He was still going by his given name and not Bubba. But Bubba is a successful entrepreneur, but also has felt the sting of defeat. And we're going to talk about that today. And the thing that's interesting, Bubba, about this approach, and you know this well because I remember the two of us sitting down for lunch after I had failed at one of my startups in Colorado. And I shared a lot with you. I shared how painful it was. And I was really still trying to process all of that. And you had a different experience, but one that where the company that you had invested in and had raised money for and had built the team and had some early traction didn't really reach its potential and failed. And I remember us talking about this, and specifically, I don't know if you remember, we were going to start a club called the Fail Club. And in order to be a member of the Fail Club, you had failed. Yeah, you would like $1 million or more, right? We said if you've raised and lost $1 million or more, you can be a member of the club. But
maybe
if you just had success, I know, right? So maybe we should launch the Fail Club, right, alongside the Real F Word podcast. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. There's so much history. There's a song by Ben Rector called Old Friends. Have you heard of this? It's like one of my favorite songs. If you haven't heard it, go listen to it. It's amazing. You are one of those old friends.
I know. And that's why one of my first calls was to Bubba. As we were thinking about this podcast and launching the Real F Word, I thought, I want to have this conversation again with Bubba because I know that you'll be unfiltered about the experience. And you have a lot of success that validates your capabilities as an entrepreneur. But today we don't talk about any of that. We don't talk about any of the success. We're just going to talk about your experience building Outro. And I want you to just share that story. In fact, I remember we met in Boulder, Colorado when I lived in Denver, when you were there at Techstars. And there's probably a little bit of a precursor to that. So tell me the story of Outro. Why did you start it? How much money did you raise? What was the vision for the business?
All right, so let's start at the beginning. So I was running a company called Launch Leads. So this gives you an idea. Started in 2009, an outsourced B2B appointment setting company. You would call them today SDRs or BDRs. That's kind of what the terminology is today. Service-based company, bootstrapped, just cash flowing business, service business. I had read the book by Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. And I thought to myself, okay, possibly this business won't exist in the future. And so what is the next version of what I'm doing and how can I be the one to build that? Was the first kind of idea. But I put that on the shelf. I just kind of put it on the shelf. I remember reading in magazines and thinking, oh my gosh, look at all these venture-backed startups. They're getting huge multiples at the time. And I'm doing a service-based company and I'm starting to realize that my multiple on EBITDA to exit was quite low. Maybe it was, 1 to 3x EBITDA or 3 to 5x if you're really, really cranking. And some of these tech companies were getting 10 plus X multiples. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to get into tech. Like this is where I got to go. So with the kind of the idea of morphing this business into something that could continue for a long time, and the desire of I want to learn venture capital, I want to understand that world, and I would love to have the multiples of a software company. That's kind of where the idea came. I didn't do anything about it though until I went to a Google Startup Weekend. And this Google Startup Weekend essentially was a competition where you had, 100 plus people there. You spent Friday, Saturday, that's it, just Friday and Saturday working on a business. Everybody could pitch a business and it was like 60 seconds to pitch. And I came there, I was asked to be there as a mentor. So I went there to mentor other entrepreneurs. And then when they said anybody can pitch the idea, I was like, well, I got an idea. Maybe I'll pitch. So I ended up pitching this concept. At the time, it was called Quota Deck. I didn't have a name for it at the time, but we just came up with Quota Deck because we were going to help people fulfill their quotas. And the idea behind it at the time was this 1099 sales rep that could rep multiple technology companies at once who were targeting the same demographic. So if you were targeting CMOs, you might have 5 to 10 companies that you could sell to that same CMO, because a lot of it is based on the relationship. And the hardest part is getting in the door, setting an appointment, getting the decision maker. Anyway, probably too much info on the actual product, but we ended up winning. So we won that competition, and then we went to the national. So that was like the Utah Startup Weekend. And then we got invited to pitch at the national competition. Didn't win the national competition, but ended up applying to Techstars. I would call it the, number 2 accelerator in the country. Y Combinator is what most people know about. And so in 2014, I got invited to come to the Boulder headquarters of Techstars. I was one of the earliest Utah companies to ever be accepted into Techstars. I tried Y Combinator and didn't make it. Got through the interviews. But this idea behind starting the software company became really, really exciting. Mm-hmm. And the more I talked about it to people, the more excited people would get. And it was like it was on fire. It was downhill. It was easy. The ball had so much momentum, the stone, whatever you want to call it. And things just came. I mean, I only had a couple meetings with investors. First check came. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this what raising venture capital is like?
Too easy.
It's not. I just got really lucky. But I think one of the reasons I was able to raise capital so easily was that I had almost a decade of industry experience. And specifically, I had clients that were the VC's portfolio companies. Mm-hmm. So they had already known my name. They had seen me around. They had heard of what I've done in that similar industry. And so when I came to them with this tech idea, they were like, hey, this is a repeat founder. He knows the industry. He knows what's coming. He's done it before, and he's got a profitable business already. Let's give him a shot.
What could go wrong?
And he's accepted into this prestigious Techstars.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
And what could go wrong? So they wrote the first check. Peterson Ventures, Kickstart Seed Fund, Techstars came in, and then a small group out of Arizona called Tall Wave Capital. Mm-hmm. And then shout out to my 2 angel investors, which I love to this day, Brent Thompson and Joe Atkin.
Both great entrepreneurs.
Unbelievable entrepreneurs. And they saw vision. They believed in me. And I was delighted, right, to have them be a part of the ride. Went through Techstars. I ended up recruiting a CTO, fractional CTO at the time, and then it is a designer, because I didn't know how to build a tech product.
Sure. So
I had a CTO and a designer. So I had the in back and front end, and then I was a business guy. And I ended up getting another person to come on board who helped us kind of from a marketing and salesy type position. Anyway. 3 to 4 months in, that's when we got to see each other. Yeah. The Techstars experience was unreal. I learned so much. The network, the connections. If you can ever go through an accelerator, I think it's hugely valuable. We ended up raising more capital through that process because it was first started at like 400, and we ended up with like 1.25 was our total raise. So not a ton, but for a first time, fundraiser, that was pretty cool.
That's your seed round. That's the money you need to build a product, to validate it in the market, do a little bit of sales and marketing, right?
So we ended up going to market and starting to get on clients. And the idea, so it morphed like most startups do. We pivoted from this 1099 salesperson idea to becoming more of a referral automation platform for sales referrals and hiring referrals. And as we built out the technology, we would have our networks, like I would upload my LinkedIn network into the system. The algorithm, the AI back in the day. I
remember doing this.
Oh, yeah. Because it was easy back in the day. You could download your LinkedIn contacts, easily upload the entire CSV, have all of the data, And then our algorithms would categorize who is everybody and how they're connected. So that when, let's say, Joe, you came to me and said, I wanted to talk to, you wanted to talk to more CEOs. Well, in my network, I had 100 CEOs. It would prompt me within the platform to say, hey, Bubba, you could introduce Joe to 100 people. Which ones do you feel comfortable introducing to Joe? And then I would just select, well, out of those 100, I probably would feel comfortable with these like 10 or 15. And then it would automatically create this double opt-in intro. That's what we called it. Mm-hmm. So you had opted in, I had opted in, and then I was asking this person if they would be interested in introduction. Long story short, we started getting checks from clients. So we had we had real revenue coming in. I think at one point we had 250 Rand in revenue, which was this super positive. Like we're doing this.
A great signal. People are paying for your product.
People are paying for the product. They want the product. We've built the product. The introductions are working, meaning the algorithms, the AI back in the day before AI was a thing, was working. It was finding the right people. We were making connections happen, but we couldn't make enough connections happen. So the companies had prepaid essentially for credit on the system.
Oh, interesting.
So, the Domos of the world or a Pluralsight or these tech companies, they wanted these sales introductions. So they'd be like, yeah, here's, 20 grand. Go give me as many, of these referrals as you can. And as they would get the referrals, it would like deduct out of their thing. Well, we started making introductions, but nowhere near as fast as we needed. So we really worked hard on the UI and the UX. Like, what's wrong? Yeah. Is it the product that's wrong? What's the psychology behind people making introductions? And it was this deep, interesting dive. I read this book called Predictably Irrational, which I'd highly recommend for any technical co-founders. It is really fascinating that human beings are essentially predictably irrational. And it walks through a million scenarios of scientific evidence, and it helps you to build a better product. I remember listening to so many books on UI UX because for some reason we just could not
People weren't they weren't making the referrals.
They weren't making enough.
Okay.
We had a baseline.
So they have this credit, $20,000, and you're just chipping away and you couldn't fulfill.
Mm-hmm. So that was the first problem.
So tell me about that moment where like, uh-oh, I have a problem. What was the signal that you were seeing?
It was like, oh, it just must be a UI UX issue. Yeah. So team, let's go. Let's change it up. Let's make it better. Let's make it this. Oh yeah, of course. You problem solve. That's what you do as an entrepreneur, right? So it was never like we're screwed. It was like, oh, let's just fix it. Change this. Let's change that. Let's test this, A, B, that. And we just could not get the volume of introductions to be happening fast enough at that level. And I think the concept of people uploading their contacts, like we ended up having 2 to 3 million contacts uploaded in the system. So that wasn't even the problem. It was people actually following through and just clicking a box saying, yes, I am happy to introduce these people.
You were facilitating the entire introduction. They just had to opt in.
That's all they had to do was just check the box. I agree.
You were drafting the email or the LinkedIn intro and the whole bit.
And we thought that maybe there was something off with like their incentive. Like what is their incentive to make an introduction? And at first it was like, well, it's goodwill. You're making introductions to them because your people will make introductions for you. And they were like, well, do we need to add cash and a cash incentive? And I'm like, well, there's pros and cons to cash incentives because then there's like this money exchange. And does that change the vibe? So we just kept testing to try and get this to work. And then I think we weren't the only companies trying to leverage LinkedIn's API and our contacts. And they shut all of their API down. Now, they couldn't shut it down so that you could never get your contacts, but they made it a miserable experience. Today, if you download your LinkedIn contacts, for example, I have 23,000 followers on LinkedIn. If I downloaded my contacts, I got 500 emails. That's it from 23,000. So they are not willing to share and people have the right to not opt in to share with their contacts. That back in the day, you had everything. So 2 things. They first shut off the API, which was essentially how we got all of our data. It was through LinkedIn. So one error for sure was that we relied on this singular platform to be our data source. So when that happened, we're like, okay, well, let's jump to Google contacts. And so we were trying to figure out how to do Google contacts, but Google contacts were like your grandma
Sure.
and your aunt and uncle. And it wasn't the business people that we needed, nor did it have the form filled, pieces in it.
So how far into the business are you at this point?
So we're in
a year or two?
We are in a year and a half by this point, because we had this traction.
Early traction.
Yeah, we got early traction, which gave us this almost a false positive.
Mm-hmm.
And so this false positive, like we're telling everybody, like we're making it happen. Look, we got revenue. We're making intros. It's happening. And then it was about a year and a half-ish that LinkedIn shut everybody off.
But even before LinkedIn shut it down,
there were still signals.
There wasn't enough velocity in the introductions,
You're right.
To sustain the business.
Yeah, so that velocity, but I never saw that as the issue.
Yeah.
I really never did, because I just thought,
you thought it was
that could be solvable.
Yeah, UX issue.
Yeah. Do we need an app? Is it an app issue? Do we need push notifications? Is it, because back in the day, it was just a laptop, desktop functionality. So that wasn't even what we thought was a problem. And so as we continued to test and test and test, and then I ended up recruiting, let's say here, a year into it, my co-founder, Dave Oldham, loved working with him. Like, it was just so much fun.
Yeah.
And then brought on like Zach Barney on the sales side, and some other amazing
How
people.
big was the team at its height?
Oh, geez. I mean, we only had 6, I think, at our height.
Still small.
But we were hiring because we had this false positive. We had revenue.
Yeah. Were you guys paying yourself from the money you raised?
We had paid ourselves, yeah.
Okay.
We had paid ourselves a very small percentage of what would normally be a salary.
Sure.
But then the second we were probably a year and a half into it is when we stopped paying. Dave and I stopped taking a paycheck. And that we made that just choice to keep the payroll going.
How much cash did you have in the bank at this point?
Probably at that point, maybe only $250,000 or something like that.
So we're cash
dwindling.
balance is dwindling.
We were extremely efficient, like cash efficient. So that could last us almost a year. Like it was.
You weren't burning a lot of cash.
No, we were not burning it. I mean, we worked out of my basement office. It was literally, they'd come to my house, walk into the basement, and we were working out of a room. And nobody was getting paid a ton.
Right.
But we were generous with equity and things like that.
And just let's talk about equity. So when you went out and raised money from these great investors, right, who we both respect, what was the vision that you painted for them? What did you think the outcome could be, the financial outcome could be, if you guys continued to execute over 5 or 6 or 7 years?
I mean, with the original concept, without even that false positive of revenue, they told me, they were like, Bubba, this is a binary outcome. You will be the biggest thing out there, competing with LinkedIn potentially, or you'll be nothing. Like and I was like, okay.
Those are tough words now, right?
It was give it a shot.
Yeah, those are
you
prophetic.
have to compete with a multi-billion-dollar company like LinkedIn. And I never thought that we would necessarily compete. I thought we would partner. I thought we'd get acquired by. I thought that's maybe the direction we were going to go.
So yeah, it was.
But it was a binary.
It was $1 billion or bust, right?
Yeah.
That was what everyone thought. That's what you thought. You thought, listen, if this goes well, this is my last thing.
Yeah.
Right, and I'll retire and climb Mount Everest. But if it doesn't work out, it was going to be a bust.
Yeah.
So you had your eyes wide open going into it.
For sure.
That this was a little bit of a swing for the fences type opportunity.
100%. And I was okay with that because I had built this steady cash flow business, profitable business.
Services business.
That was great. And it was steadily growing. Inc. 5000, like 3 years in a row. I had hired a CEO to run it day to day, and he was doing a great job. I had given him equity and salary.
I think you offered the CEO gig to me once.
I did.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
You and I had that conversation.
I wanted you to do it.
I probably should have.
I don't know. Who knows? Everything happened for a reason. But yeah, it was an interesting vibe because I think I'm a glass half full type of a person, always have been. So as we would come into problems, I would just sit down and how do you fix it? How do you solve it? That's just what you do. And that's how I always approached everything. And then I believe as a sales-oriented entrepreneur, sales and revenue solve most problems.
Sure.
Is my belief. I still is my belief. Most problems, though. Not all problems. And so I just thought, well, let's just sell to get ahead of it. So I brought in more salespeople and we sell.
Brute force. Just sell more clients.
But the reality is that was the easy part. And we didn't know that. So we were getting these because they all wanted what we had. what we were promising, they wanted. They wanted more sales leads. Yeah. They wanted more hiring referrals.
So you had identified a pain. You had identified a clear need.
We had nailed the pain for sure.
The message market fit was like spot on, right? And that's evidenced by the frictionless sales process. But the delivery, right? You couldn't deliver on the brand promise. Is that
totally?
Well, that's what happened.
And now that I can look back, so we ended up shutting it down. It was about 2.5 years into it.
Okay, so you're 2.5 years in.
So we had to let people go at like year 2.
Okay, tell me about that. Like,
so painful. Don't get me wrong. I've hired and fired 200 plus people in my career. I had laid people off, but it was years earlier. Yeah. We had like in our previous business had like 6 of our biggest clients. Yeah. All quit at the same time, and so we had to lay people off. But for whatever reason, this one, it stung so deep. Such family, right? Like this was a very small group. These are people that I respected, that I loved, that we saw the vision together, and we were seeing the success happen together. And so when it stopped, we were all just bewildered. Like, why? Why is this not working? How come we can't change the UI UX well enough to get people to do it? So I think all of us were in this pondering about why, how did this not work? I remember we'd go to our investors, and I tried to keep our investors up to speed the whole time. Like, hey, look, we're struggling. We found this is great, but this isn't working. Hey, we did this. It's awesome. This thing isn't still working here. We got revenue, but we're struggling. And then LinkedIn, oh my gosh. And then when we came to them and we had probably 6 months of runway left, 6 months of runway with nobody, like no team.
Right.
Just to like keep operations going and keep the site up and no salaries or anything like that. We went to the investors like, look, we have these 5 tests that we could do. And if we do these 5 tests, there's a chance that we could hit it and it could succeed. But I can't, I was honest. I said, look, but I can't promise.
So you had 5 bets.
5 bets. But if we had these 5 bets, then we would need a little bit extra runway.
How much more capital?
Like another $250,000.
Okay.
And be like, okay, if we had these 5 bets, I think we could do it. And I think there's a chance we can hit it, but I won't, and I can't guarantee that. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I just don't know. And they looked at me in the eye and they were like, look, Bubba, we love you. We think this idea is great, but I don't think it's the right time to put more capital into it. And I remember the dagger that just like felt in my soul.
Because you knew that was it. When they said,
when they were like,
done, close
we're not going to put more cap. Yeah. And I knew that the signal behind my investors who had invested in us the whole way, if I were to go try to raise additional capital outside with them saying no,
sure,
very, very, very small chances.
Right.
So they essentially said, look, try and find a soft landing. And I was like, well, I've never done that before. But I'm a sales.
Is there such a thing?
Yeah, I'm a sales-oriented entrepreneur. Let me see if I can do this. So I essentially spent the next 6 months solely trying to generate a buyer for the assets, for the connections, for the user base, whatever. And I found that it is a lot harder to sell a business than to be acquired. Those two are very different things.
For sure.
When you have people approaching you to get acquired versus you pitching your business, it is I won't say that it's not impossible, but I failed. I failed at getting that done. And I worked.
How many conversations did you have with potential buyers?
I probably still have it. Well, maybe I don't have the spreadsheet, but at least 150 people.
Like anyone that could benefit from the product or the traction or the technology, like you were just trying.
I'd even talk to like small PE firms about like, could you wrap this in or roll this in?
Roll it up. And did anyone get serious in the acquisition?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So we had a funnel and went through the funnel and landed with like 7 like truly interested buyers. And I thought, hey, this is 7. Like we could do a little bidding. Maybe we can actually get something real out of this. And essentially in the end, all of them were like, nah, we're going to pass. We're going to pass.
When you were down to the last one, because I've been in this situation, right, where like my only reasonably positive outcome would be to sell the asset or sell the business. Yeah. And I remember like the moment that the last potential acquirer came and said, hey, fact, in this other business, it was the LA Times.
Oh my gosh.
who had their own set of issues, and they just like, hey, we looked at it, and I knew like the moment they said no, like it was like the domino.
Yeah.
And then everything that happened after was super painful. What was that moment? Do you remember the last potential acquirer and when they told you like, hey, we're not going to do it? I don't remember the name of them.
But I do remember getting off the phone and like looking at Dave, who he and I had now been working for a long time without any pay.
Yeah.
And with the hope and dream of like making this work. And I do believe there was quite a few months where I even told Dave, like, look, you don't need to work, go find your next thing. I'll just try and sell it. But I remember calling him up and just saying, look, dude, I don't think this is going to happen. Like, I just don't think there's anyone out there. And LinkedIn was still closed down. So like we didn't necessarily have a solution for some of the problems that we had faced already. But I personally went into what I think was my first level of depression and anxiety was in that moment of my life where I felt like, and this is a big caveat I want people to hear, I felt that I was a failure personally because I had tied myself and my reputation to the business so that when the business didn't work out, then I looked at me and said, well, then something's wrong with me. And it was incredible because some of these investors, I didn't recognize it at the time, but they would set me down and be like, look, Bubba, we know it's not your fault. Like you worked incredibly hard. You kept us up to date on everything. And if you were to start a new company, we'd back you again. And I remember when I heard that, it didn't fully penetrate because I was so down on myself. But now that I look in the past, I can see that was like this glowing light that, although it didn't penetrate at the time, it grew over time. And it helped me to rebuild some of that confidence. But it took years to rebuild confidence, which is embarrassing to say the least. But I remember the depths of depression was probably a 6-month time frame where I just like wasn't myself. It was hard on my marriage. It was hard on my outside relationships. My career basically stopped. And I ended up becoming a prepper and I started prepping. And I kind of had this religious awakening and I started exercising more. Like it was I started putting in some good priorities into my life that I can now look back and say that I'm grateful for. But I was in the depths of hell for sure in that context. I've since been through harder things, but that was extremely difficult at the time. And the worst was my friends, the angel investors, to have to go to them and say, I don't have your money. And I literally cannot return you any capital because we tried for so long thinking there was hope to sell.
Yeah, you trusted me. Like I've had that experience, right? And,
oh yeah.
And it is incredibly painful to be able to just acknowledge, like I did everything I could, but there's not going to be a dime back from that money that you invested, and there's really nothing. Sometimes you feel like there's nothing to show for it.
Oh
and you're just like,
I worked my tail off for almost 3 years, and I've got nothing to show for it.
How am I going to pay back my family for all the time and sacrifice?
Oh, yeah.
How am I going to pay back my investors who trusted me, right? And you're a steward of this capital. And then when it doesn't work out, it does feel personal. What's up, Phil fans? You know, as we've listened to so many guests on this podcast, that the road to success is often paved with failure, with a lot of challenges and even full-on face plants. But there's a thing that you could do to help skip some of those bumps and bruises. And that's really where the consultants at Amplio come in. See, Amplio offers fractional executives in finance, marketing, and HR. And these are people who've experienced a lot. They've been in the trenches. They've built businesses. They've failed. But here's the kicker. They've learned from those failures, and now they're applying all that wisdom to your business to support you so you don't have to learn the hard way. I mean, think about it. Instead of stumbling around in the dark and hoping you don't hit the wall, You could bring someone in who's already mapped out that room, right? Amplio consultants and experts have worked with and for numerous companies of all sizes, and they've gathered insights on what works, where to focus, and how to actually grow your business efficiently. So while we embrace failure on this podcast, there is no rule that says you have to fail at everything yourself. So check out Amplio and see how their fractional executives can help your business move forward and avoid those painful learning curves. Sometimes the smartest move is learning from someone else's failure. Visit amplio.com to learn more. Tell me, like, you use the word depression, and I just want to talk about that for a minute. Like, you are a really optimistic person. You said it earlier, you're a glass half full person, and I know this about you, Bubba. Why do you think a failed startup, which is such a common outcome, had that type of emotional impact for you?
Well, I think there were probably some insecurities that I had not addressed from even my childhood. And I know this goes like way back, but we all have insecurities. I've been learning a lot about them in the recent year. And I think our childhood wounds, and I'm not talking about like big T trauma, but like little T trauma. My parents were amazing. They were phenomenal. I had great siblings. What a wonderful upbringing I had. But we all have our issues of our upbringing. And I think I was the black sheep of the family. I have doctors, dentists, lawyers. I'm the only entrepreneur. I remember, in college, getting involved in my first startup, borrowing $5,000 from my parents to invest in my startup to earn equity. And I knew that they didn't believe in it. They were just like donating that money, knowing that it would never come back. And when I did pay them back plus interest, because I was able to sell my ownership, I had this pride of, see, I'm going to show you that I can do this. Well, why did I have a chip on my shoulder? I'm the youngest child. I was always the baby. And I was this black sheep. I never got the scholarships like my siblings did. I didn't get the straight A's like my siblings did. I did well in sports. So that was kind of where I found myself, was like a sports person. But if you think deeply enough about us as adults, a lot of who we are and what we've become is because of our childhood upbringing. All of it. And this chip on my shoulder is what got me to start my next business. So, from that little college business to then doing the one after Junto Partners, which you and I did together in 2008. And in 2009, when I started, I was like, no, I'm going to go do this. I was oblivious and naive to what the outcome could be, but it worked. And it took me a few years to get it stable, but then it really grew. And, earning $500,000 a year as a salary is not bad for a 20-something-year-old. And so I look back at like running this venture-backed startup, the opportunity cost of losing that type of salary, for 2.5 years, that adds up.
Right.
And so, that's me investing into that other startup. Anyway, the thing that I want people to realize is that if your business fails and you've tried everything that you can in your power to do and work as hard as you possibly can, know that you personally are not a failure, that it was the business that failed. And if you can understand that it was the business that failed, and the faster you can get back up and keep going, and start something else, even if that start something else means you go get a job, there's nothing wrong with that. But the sooner you get back on your feet, dust yourself off and get back in, the better you'll be off, I think. I was in a position where I didn't have to go back to work right away. And so I took this time, and it was healing for me. And I feel like there was, exercise and health was a really important part. God was a huge element for it. I'm always been a God-fearing person, a faith-based person, but I hadn't been reborn yet. I hadn't had an awakening yet. And now I look back and I say, I can see that God used this experience for me to wake me up to the reality of my circumstances. And for me to recognize that life wasn't just about being on cover of magazines, thousands of employees, and hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what he needed me to learn. And even though I felt inspired to begin the business in the first place, I felt like God told me to start the business and it didn't work. You'd think like, well, why? God, you told me to do it, but it didn't work. What the heck? And I think the way I look at it now is I see the lessons I needed to learn personally. And he used this experience to humble me, to bring me to trust in him more, and to dedicate more of my life to him. Yeah. And so that year, 2016-17, was a year that I kind of turned my own personal self around, really rededicated myself to God and church and scripture study and trying to cleanse myself and become a better person. I don't think I would have gotten to that point without this level of failure. And there's opposition in all things, we're taught. So I had this horrific experience, and then I was brought into this light. And I just see God using these experiences to teach me what I was supposed to learn. And since then, it's been almost close to, 7 years, 8 years? Mm-hmm. I can see that pattern, that I've still failed on other things in life and in work, whatever it is. And he's leveraging these experiences to teach me what I need to learn. And I just think there's a lot going back to our childhood thing. Sorry, I got off tangent. I think if we can start to recognize our relationships with our mother and our father and how there's a book called Attached. I would highly recommend it. It talks about attachment styles and theory around attachment, being anxious or avoidant and wanting to become secure. There's so much healing that can be had for all adults if we understood why we are and why we act the way we do. Anyway, there's a whole nother tangent there.
So how long did it take you? Like, I love that you've shared some of the coping mechanisms, right? What you had to kind of rely on as you were going through this really dark period of your life. And I love that physical fitness and faith. I think you talked about becoming a prepper. That's an interesting twist.
Totally.
I remember coming over to your place and you're like, check this out. And there's a big room filled with food and supplies. That's right. But how long did it really take you to build your confidence and get ready for the next venture, the next big project?
I hate to admit this, but so it's 2017, we're in 2024. 7 years later, I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
There's elements of my confidence that have been shattered. Yeah. And I ended up, going from that business that didn't work out and taking some time off, prepping. And then I joined the mom of my kids with her business and started building that. Mm-hmm. And it was a soft landing for me. It was working. We were growing. I felt like I was utilizing my skills properly and building a team and systems and processes. But I essentially decided to put my career on hold because I had a spouse that wanted to grow. Business. I wanted to grow and do her goals and passions. Well, she had supported me for 10 years. So of course I would support. Why not? But what I didn't recognize that when I did that, I didn't fully overcome my fears.
Right.
And although we grew and were very profitable and had plenty of success in those entities, I think personally, I limited myself.
Mm-hmm. You never restored your confidence.
And it was about 2 years ago, that it was time to not do that business together anymore. And that's when I was like, okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? I need to rebuild myself. And you and I talked early on about it. And it took me way longer than it should have to figure out what I was going to do. I just wanted to be so calculated.
Because of the fear of failure
Because of
again,
fear of
right?
failure.
I feel the same way, right? You just want to make sure that you don't get yourself into that spot again because of the cost, the emotional and mental health tax that comes with entrepreneurship generally, and especially when it doesn't go
Yeah.
like you had planned?
I think the younger you are, I highly recommend starting businesses the younger you are. I know you're going to think, well, I don't have an experience. I'm not an expert in something. I'm naive. And it's like, you know what? Those are all awesome characteristics, because the more you've been around the block, the more you know it will most likely fail. And because they usually do. Businesses, what is I don't even know what the percentage is anymore, but a lot.
It's the most probable outcome of every startup, right?
Yeah.
But we never have this conversation the way we're having it today. And I appreciate your openness and vulnerability. Like, I just want, like, when you think back to outro, and like, what would you do different? Because it's easy to ascribe a failure to something outside of our control.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about this. Like, it's the market, it's capital, it's competition, it's LinkedIn, the LinkedIn API, right? Like, there's no way I could like rebound after that. But what did you do wrong?
Yeah.
Like, as you've reflected on that, like, what are the 2 or 3 lessons that you want to ensure that you never make those decisions or those mistakes again?
Let's see. I think one of them is I probably hired too soon. I think the false positives gave me this hope, and being a sales-driven entrepreneur, where that is part of my expertise, that is something I knew how to do.
Hire salespeople.
Oh, build a team, hire sales, go, go, go. I think we did that way too soon now that I look at it, because that could have extended runway.
Would you would have,
There were probably 3 hires that we shouldn't have had.
So you would have just continued founder-led sales for a longer period of time before you brought in more AEs and salespeople.
But what was so interesting is that I did that in part because I needed to go raise additional capital.
Yeah, of course.
And when you're raising capital, it's like at least a half-time job.
It's a full-time sales job is what it is.
Yeah. And so my ability to close more sales was limited because I was raising capital. So I brought in salespeople to continue that.
But if you would have spent the same amount of time selling the product into customers, you might have been able to solve some of your problem with revenue versus with outside capital.
Yeah. So I'd say that was a mistake for sure. Being reliant on a single entity like a LinkedIn, that was a problem. That was a mistake. We just never thought ever that they would ever shut down our API. Why? It's our personal, so building, a lot of people build like an Instagram thing. It's like, okay, be aware. They may just shut you off one day.
They will do whatever they want, whenever they want, with complete disregard for your startup.
Yeah, totally. And there's many, many stories like that. So be aware if you're building something that is attached.
Dependent
is the right word. Yeah. That's not the right business model. Diversify at least outside of just one. Another mistake. I should have stayed healthier throughout the process. Physically healthier and probably mentally healthier. I think I was so worried and so nervous and anxious about the business, succeeding, that I put, exercise and eating right and sleeping right on the back burner. And that was probably my worst physical fitness state of my life.
Do you think that impacted your performance?
Oh, for sure.
As a leader, as
I think
as a founder?
I think even purely confidence.
Yeah.
If you don't, I love CrossFit. It's been a really good thing for me.
You look great now, Bubba.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But I'm working really hard.
Yeah.
And I think that dedication, I think you have a clearer mind. You have the right chemicals going through your body. If you're eating healthier foods, you're going to be, I think your brain is stronger, your body's stronger, your emotional well-being is stronger. I do agree that I wasn't close enough. I should have been closer to God through the process as well. So if we're the buck stops with me, I was the founder CEO. The business failed because of me and my choices and decisions. Sure, there are extenuating circumstances, but I accept that as the CEO founder, I am the last straw. And so these are things that I bring up because, my relationship with God, although I was still going to church, I had not dedicated myself to him like I believe I should be. And the health side and family. I lived away from my family for 3.5 months. And I'd come and see them every couple weeks or 2-3 weeks or something.
Boulder, and they lived here in Salt Lake.
My wife, we had 3 kids. 4th was on the way. That was an incredibly difficult time, a very difficult time. She was supportive for me to go, but through the process, it was incredibly difficult. Now, people have to go in the military. People have to go on job sites. People have to do things like this. And so it's not that it's you can't succeed in doing it. For us, it was a huge blow. And so I don't believe that was best.
So some of those relationships, right, were weakened through that entrepreneurial journey with Outro. What would you have done different?
So as a young entrepreneur, I had a goals list. Very temporally driven.
Sure.
Millions of dollars, hundreds of employees, covers of magazines, awards. That's what I desired.
That's how you were measuring your success.
I was measuring my success on that. And I look at that now in the past and I say, because of my upbringing, I felt like that was the only way I could prove my worth in the world, was if I accomplished these things and I became a multi-millionaire and, won all the awards, then finally they would respect me. And I wouldn't be the black sheep anymore. I didn't think that along the way. That wasn't a conscious thought. I can now look backward and say, I think those are some of my little tweaks, that I was doing. So, changing your desire. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have financial freedom. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think if you put that over the most important things in your life, it may cause problems. And so I knew that the going away from the family was a temporary time and I'd be back. So for that temporary time, I thought it'd be okay to sacrifice from a family perspective. I look now and I say, maybe that wasn't the best.
I feel the same way. You and I talked about this. I spent 5 years working for a company in Colorado, and 3 of those years I lived here in Salt Lake. Yeah. At a condo downtown Denver. And I spent far too many nights in my condo in Denver versus in my bed with my family and like at home with my family. I think back and I've had that same learning that the price was not worth the benefit or the reward, period. Even if it would have been a massive financial success, outcome, those are nights that I can never get back. And doesn't mean we don't have to travel sometimes.
Of course.
But that if I had a do-over, that's one of the things that I would.
6 kids right here, 8 kids right here.
We've done our part.
I think it's important to remember. Young entrepreneurs, you're just grinding. You're just doing what you can do.
Whatever it takes, right? Whatever it takes.
And there is an element of that. And there are VCs who will say, I will only fund people who will do whatever it takes. I'm not that guy. So when I'm writing checks now as influence.vc, I want to see some more balance. Yeah. And I may miss out on some incredible business opportunities. But if I can tell that this person loves his Lambo more than he loves his family, that's probably not the right guy for me.
Yeah, I don't invest in anyone with Lambos. That's part of my investment criteria. If you have a Lambo, then you're funding your own business.
Yeah, that's right. Sell your
car.
You're
not using my money.
Yeah, exactly. But there are these life principles. So you've probably heard this before, but you fill up this glass jar with boulders and then stones, pebbles, sand, water. You put your most important things in your life first, and then the rest can come out. And so for me now, I try to put God first. That has to be my number one, right? The relationship with your spouse and your kids, your health, and then work. Mm-hmm. And I look at that as, and there's a whole bunch of other things in there, right? Service and charity and that are incredibly important, but it's hard to think, okay, I'm going to go change the world. I'm going to become the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and have those priorities in order. Mm-hmm. And the honest truth is I don't need or want to be the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. I respect them for what they've done. And they are incredibly genius human beings. But I would not choose that for my life. I would prefer to choose more of a lifestyle that brings me joy and brings me closer to my family.
Thank you so much. There's so much wisdom there, and you've been so open and vulnerable about like what matters to you now and what you've learned through that journey. Why do you think there's such an aversion to the word failure? Like, why do you think like we know it intellectually, but we don't say it. We don't talk about it in unvarnished ways. What do you think is that pride?
Yeah, for sure. 100% pride. It's our inability to, it's our insecurities. I'm going to go back to that. It's our insecurities. We're sitting here in this business podcast. I know you've had successes. I know the people who are listening have had successes. It's embarrassing to say, I failed, and here's all the reasons why I'm a failure, or what I did to make this fail. It's hard to hear. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's awkward.
Does it still hurt just a little bit to talk
absolutely.
about outro? Because it still hurts me when I have to talk about the specifics of a failed venture and the money that I lost and the decisions that I made 7 years later. You and I have both been on this similar journey. I'm just getting to this point where I can even host a podcast talking about failure and actually share my experiences openly. And you're right, it's embarrassing. Like, we just don't want to acknowledge it. Yeah. We want to hide from it still. And I think that's what's so liberating when you and I can have a conversation and be like, yep, we're failed entrepreneurs and we're okay.
Yeah.
We're okay.
And we're still alive.
We're still alive, and we learned and we're growing, but we did not hit the ball out of the park. In fact, we didn't even get the ball into the outfield.
Nope. It stayed at home plate.
Yep.
I feel like it's important for those, because most people who are listening have probably failed at something, because that's human nature. And so if you're listening, it's something to think about, that's part of the path. It's part of the plan. We have to fail in order to stretch ourselves and to grow. I am embarrassed to say that it's taking 7 years for me to be able to feel like I'm just hopefully, creeping out of this failed mentality and thinking more positively about myself, saying, okay, I can do this, or I can't, and having that positive outlook. Even though I'm a positive person by nature, it's been a struggle for sure. And it's interesting that it could, potentially a decade of my life will I attribute to having these types of feelings. And it's not an overnight, like, get up the next day and you're fine and you're not going to think about the failure again. And I hope not. I think it's where you can learn the most. People talk about that all the time. You learn more from your failures than you do your successes.
We just don't talk about it.
We just don't talk about it. And I would suggest, if you're not willing to talk about it yet, that you journal it, that you write it down, at least get it out. Because I think as entrepreneurs, when somebody asks you, how are you doing? How's your business doing? What do you answer? Oh, it's great.
It's going great.
Doing good. Yep. Mm-hmm. Great. And you're dying inside because you can't make payroll.
And we have to watch, we open up LinkedIn and it's post after post about wins and successes and raising capital and selling businesses and acquisitions. And like, it's hard to see the reality through all of that polish and varnish.
Yeah. I think, realizing that everyone's going through their own crap, whether it's professionally or personally, every human being is going through some level of crap, some level of hell that they have to go through. And it is part of your plan. It's why you're on this earth. You have to go through it. Again, I'll go back to the opposition and all things. Know that whatever you're going through right now, it is for your good. That's a quote, not mine. It is for your good. And you have to look and say, why is this for my good? If you're going through this depths of despair, look up and ask God, why? Why is this for my good? If everything that goes on in this life is for my good, then why? Yeah. And you may get some answers.
This has been a profound story and sermon today, Bubba. I love it. Maybe we should rename the podcast the Entrepreneurial Therapy Session, because I feel like over the course of the next several weeks, as we talk to more and more entrepreneurs, and I hope the audience feels this, we're getting to the really root of why entrepreneurship can be so hard. And I just wonder how this experience for you has shaped the way that you invest as a venture capitalist. Like, now that you've had a failure or some, Like, does that change the way you analyze businesses or invest in businesses? And how do you counsel entrepreneurs now, given your experience at Outro?
Well, what's interesting is now the tides have flipped. I was embarrassed to tell my angel investors and VCs that I lost their money. I've now had multiple come to me and say, Bubba, I'm so sorry, I have to shut down my business. And because I'm their angel investor or I'm their VC. And almost immediately I try to respond with, so-and-so entrepreneur, I love you. It's not your fault. And, please just know, talk to me about your next business. Let's see if we can do it again. Because I received that kind of gesture and it changed for me kind of that mentality of who I was. And I want to do the same for others. I mean, the guy who just walked out of the room, right? I love him. This is a fellow entrepreneur. I love him to death. And I wrote the check to this entrepreneur because I love him and I believe in him. And even though the business didn't work, I still love him as an individual. Like, he's a good human being. And yes, 50 grand is gone. And that's part of investing. And I get it. And now from this side, I can see how my investors felt when mine didn't work. And it has healed a part of me. Because I know that they're just like, hey, you know what? You win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
I was hoping, but I get it.
Yeah.
And it's okay. So I don't know. I feel like as young entrepreneurs, if you're listening to this, don't get discouraged about not starting because of failure. I think that's where most wantrepreneurs end up, is they have these ideas, they think they're genius ideas, and then they never execute. Execution is really the key to success. You may want to fail faster, though, and that the concept of failing fast they teach in Techstars. Fail fast so that you can essentially pivot or iterate and and change to find what might work. The faster that you can make those iterations, and Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, who also led Y Combinator for a long time, he says the companies who iterate the fastest will have the most success. If you're, uploading your new software every month because that's your cadence to go live, and another company is doing it every 2 or 3 days, think of how many iterations they get over you. And those companies will see more success. So I would look at you in the eye and say, still go for that idea, but fail fast. Yeah. Don't draw out the process to take 2 or 3 years. Try to find out as fast as you possibly can if it's a viable idea or not. That means don't talk to your mom or your grandma or your aunts and uncles. Go talk to random strangers. Give them the product or let them use the tool. Or even if you don't even have it built, go try and pre-sell whatever you're going to do and see if people are willing to do it before you go and spend years and years of your life on something you may not know they want. I'm Bubba Page. I'm the founder of Outro.com, the company that failed. Raised venture capital, spent 2.5 years of blood, sweat, and tears. We had to shut it down. But don't get down, because you can do it over and over again, and at some point that success will come. So keep at it.
Thanks for tuning in to The Real F Word. The real F word is failure. And remember that failure is a stepping stone. It's not just a stumbling block. Join us next time as we continue to explore the journey of resilience and growth without ignoring the true cost, personally, professionally, and financially, that comes with failure. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep embracing the real stories of entrepreneurship. See you next time.